Folks, thank you for joining the joint Ordr and Meditology webinar. We're going to be talking about building a strategy for securing the Internet of Medical Things. We appreciate your attendance today. Everything that we're doing right now will also be recorded and available for you. So if you're attending this, you can watch it after the fact, and you can also share it with friends and family. Couple of housekeeping notes for you guys to be aware of. The intention we've got right now is we're going to do a presentation for you, and then we're going to take any questions you've got. The back end, we're going to focus on Q&A answers, but if you've got questions that we can catch in time, we'll try to blend in answers as we go. Hopefully you can see the area where you can type in any questions that you've got on your GoToWebinar console. Just type in any questions and we'll handle them as they go. From an overall perspective, we hope you find this an educational activity in terms of what we're going to be presenting. We've actually broken down our presentation into several different sections. We're going to kick off first with Meditology, talking about what they've been seeing from an overall cyber perspective in healthcare and strategies to be considering for how you actually address this programmatically. Then we're going to fold in and talk a bit about an Ordr solution and kind of problems that people have been having in protecting medical and other IoT infrastructure in their healthcare organization, and how you can try to address that problem too. Let me introduce a couple of speakers that we've got. First, myself, Russell Rice. I'm the VP of Product Strategy at Ordr, and I'll introduce myself in a bit more depth later, but I've been around the block quite a long time in cybersecurity. We're also joined by Nick Keys from Meditology. He's a service delivery manager and is very deep and steep in medical device programs and security in general, and he's one of the nation's top, so I hope you're going to get a lot of good information from him. But kicking off this presentation, we've got Jonathan Elmer, who's going to focus first on what Meditology's kind of view of the world is and what we've been seeing in the industry. He's a CISO at Meditology and also a very pronounced healthcare specialist as well, and very versed in also high-end medical practices. One of the things that I was going to call out for you is we do have a number of materials that we've also posted and are available to you. There's a case study from one organization called BB that you may want to take a look at, who's deployed technology and services. Another one that I'd call out for you is that we've got data sheets on the services and products of both companies respectively, Meditology's and Ordr's. So those should be available for your download as well as part of this presentation. But without further ado, let me kick over and have Jonathan kick us off, and go ahead.
Great, thanks Russell, and thanks everyone for attending. So quick overview of the agenda. We've obviously been through the introductions, and I will be talking about some of the common medical device security challenges we see. So we'll do a couple slides over that, and then we'll pass it over to Nick Keith to talk about regulations and standards and some of the issues we see in the industry there, followed by Russell talking a bit about the automation approaches that Ordr can give an organization. So who is Meditology? We are a auditing service that focuses primarily in the healthcare industry. We have won back-to-back best in class for our auditing. We also serve as HIPAA expert for the OCR. Our partners and leadership include many former CISOs and privacy officers, and a lot of clients coast to coast. And so these are some of the services that we provide. Medical device security and Internet of Things security is a big part of what we do, but also HIPAA compliance, various certifications, high trust, PCI, ethical hacking. We do some executive services and staff augmentation. Our sister company focuses primarily on vendor security risk management, so any third-party risk there. And as you can see, we have offices across the country, Atlanta, Philadelphia, San Diego, Colorado, and Nashville. And Russell, do you want to quickly talk about Ordr? Yeah,
for the group, as mentioned, I work at Ordr as a product strategy. We've been fortunate enough to focus in healthcare as a vendor for about 3 years now, and have numerous organizations who've been adopting our technology and rolling it out and using it in production. Our focus is really about medical device and other IoT protection. We are fortunate to have some venture capital also from Kaiser and Mayo Cleveland Clinic, who very much seem to appreciate what we're bringing to the market. And we'll talk more about our technology and what we do in a moment. But good news is we've got a lot of people using our stuff. So if you give us a good gander, hopefully we'll make it worth your time.
Great, thanks, Russell. So now we'll dive into some of the medical device security challenges that we see pretty consistently throughout the medical healthcare delivery industry. So why should we care about medical devices? Well, the bottom line is there's probably no other part of the healthcare industry that can have such a major impact on a patient's life. So some of the side effects of medical devices are that they could be misconfigured or reconfigured by malicious attackers. They could deliver lethal dosages of medication. You could turn off life-saving alerts, make devices unavailable or malfunction. So via ransomware, think back to WannaCry, even though it didn't hit the US that hard, it was really prevalent in the UK. Compromised medical devices obviously are usually connected these days, right? So they're part of the bigger hospital network. So by opening up a medical device, you can potentially increase that vertical or horizontal traffic to where the attacker can get to other systems within the hospital. So you obviously need to think about HIPAA compliance and breach notifications and brand reputation if you experience a breach via a medical device. So what we typically see is that medical devices are typically way behind where the rest of the organization is. So where they might be doing really good at the Windows environment, their servers environment, their databases, their data centers, they've got it all really good. The medical devices seem to lag behind, and there's multiple reasons for that. So we'll just dive into a couple of those. The first thing that an organization typically sees when they decide to formally tackle medical device security is that it's very complex and that the clinical workflows are very complex as well. So outside of that, usually this involves multiple internal and external stakeholder groups. So what do we mean by that? Usually you have a lot of reliance on the vendor, not just that we're going to throw some patches up on WUSAS and push those out in a good time because they may be hooked up to a patient. So again, reliance on third-party manufacturers. So usually the time for when a vulnerability is found and the time for a patch, there is usually a significant amount of lag time with the vendor providing a patch to the vulnerability. So if we all think back to Urgent 11, there's still several of those vulnerabilities, DICOM being one, that the industry has failed to remediate. Regulations and standards are a hodgepodge collection. There's really not any, outside of the FDA and the certification process, there's not really any mandatory regulation saying you must do this or that to protect a patient in regards to medical devices. Limited staff resources. So this is another big one. Typically you have your IT department, but they're not going to go work on medical devices. So we're relying on biomed or clinical engineering, and they already have their hands full just keeping the machines up and running. So when you do some vulnerability scanning or you have a passive scanning device, the next thing you notice is you're going to have some challenges in prioritizing which devices pose the highest risk. So by that, without a classification, medical device classification process in place, knowing which devices pose the highest risk is always difficult. So a hospital may have 15 or 30 or even more 1,000 devices in the environment. So knowing which devices are the highest risk is a very important part, but also very difficult. Again, traditional security playbooks don't translate well to medical devices. So if we're looking at something like a vulnerability management playbook that may work very well for the rest of the hospital, when you go and try to do that with medical devices, try to run that same playbook, it's just not going to translate well. You cannot expect to have the same SLAs for remediating vulnerabilities that you do with the rest of the environment. Another big issue that we typically see is default passwords throughout, right? So the vendor sends you a device, it's got its default password, anybody can hop on Google, look that up, and a lot of organizations aren't really changing that, or the vendor is telling them that they can't change it, which neither are entirely true. Now, missing patches, again, usually we're talking about legacy systems here, so and not even legacy systems, just regular Windows systems may be very well far behind the regular patch schedule. Remote access, so typically a lot of devices, they'll have a contract with the vendor to provide remote patches and that sort of thing. So the vendor's remoting in and not notifying the client, that, you know, maybe leaving open the connection for longer than necessary, and you may have more than one person using a generic login for that remote access shared among many different technicians. All of those kind of combined, and there's a lot more issues that are prevalent, but those are kind of the biggest issues that we see. Really does make medical devices the weakest link in the security chain. So some of the technical challenges that we typically see, again, I mentioned legacy devices. This is very rampant. Recent engagement with a client, we were looking at Windows XP based C-arms, and they had quite a few of them in the environment, and we were quoted for replacing those in the tune of around 13 million. And when we started digging into what they were going to provide, it was Windows 7. That was their newest operating system. And this wasn't that long ago, a month or so. So again, the manufacturer is very far behind, and there's not really any incentive for them to use newer operating systems if they're selling those devices. Lack of visibility. So what we mean by that is to just know which medical devices are active on the network, right? We're not doing scans. We may not be collecting audit logs. So we have no idea what's there and who it's talking to and what it's doing. Cannot deploy security agents. So what do we mean by that? Antivirus. I'll go back to the Urgent 11 DICOM vulnerability. It would be very easy if we could have AV in front of that would scan from the DICOM preamble. However, a lot of devices don't allow it, or the vendor doesn't allow it, or again, back to the legacy system, they just can't support modern day AV. We typically see the onboarding process is fractured and inefficient. So by that, the medical devices are coming in a number of different ways. It may not just be through procurement. It could be that research is getting devices, that doctors are buying their own devices, or that they're coming in by any number of venues. And when they do that, security itself lacks the ability to kind of take a look at these devices and pose any risks that might be present for those devices. And again, too many devices to track by hand. So it's not uncommon to see 15,000 medical devices in an environment, and I think that's kind of on the low end. We've certainly seen 50,000, 60,000, 70,000. So how do you track those? How do you know when they're no longer on the network? Again, I'll use reference to another client. We were helping with some vulnerability remediation for medical devices, and we were running in circles just trying to figure out if a device was still on the network, and nobody could figure that out. So that's pretty hard to get a hand on. Again, no guidance on normal versus abnormal behavior. So how is a device supposed to function, and what might indicate abnormal behavior that should be something that we should worry about? Again, vulnerability tracking, we've talked a lot about this already. It is very complex. You could get these scans, and then trying to figure out what to do with them is going to be much different than the traditional environment. So you have to consider downtime for patching. You have to consider a plethora of different kind of situations in which how can we do this. And it's difficult to protect these devices and get them into segmentation. So the clinical workflow, if we don't have that documentation, you can look at a medical device and go, hey, let's put this on its own network, its own VLAN, but not know that, hey, it's talking to this printer over here, it's talking to 4 other workstations. Next thing you know, you've broken that workflow, and the medical device can't communicate with what it needs to be. So again, these are some of the technical issues that we see, and it really does point back to kind of our overarching theme here, that medical devices really are the weakest link in the security chain. Now I will pass it over to my colleague, Nick Keys.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. So a crucial part really here to consider is that anytime we're building any type of security or risk program is to not really start from the beginning and blaze a new trail, but to look for an opportunity to see, you know, what industry and what standards and other kind of bodies have done to help you along the way. And so the image you're kind of looking at now is really a triangle or a hodgepodge of a ton of different regulations and standards that are out there currently. There's not a sort of silver bullet framework for medical device security, much like we would see in a sort of high trust or a NIST, but we do have some strong guidance out there that's developed from entities such as Underwriter Laboratories, MITRE, FDA, those kind of entities. And so there's currently efforts both federally and through private organizations to work on developing comprehensive frameworks and guidance for IoT and medical device security, but none of those are really sort of your complete and ready for adoption quite yet. So for the time being, really our best strategy is to be knowledgeable of all these leading efforts and sort of sift through and pick and choose what works best for your organization. And then as new standards and guidance are developed, it's really important that we build those into our strategies. You know, as we're designing things, it's not sort of just a single point or a couple strategies at the time. It's really a maturing your process and procedures over time with new ideologies and stuff that come along the way. All right, so now that we have kind of some of the industry guidance that we can use to influence our program, we're going to go over some of the important building blocks whenever we're developing a medical device and Internet of Things strategy. So while recent advances have been made in automation, Internet of Things tools, scan, discovery, an effective strategy really combines people, process, and technology together. You really can't do any of it without all of it. You can make some progress, but an effective strategy really marries all of that together to build a really comprehensive and scalable program. So one of our foundational goals in building our IoT and medical device strategy is to clearly define our vision and our outcomes. So we want to make sure that we're upholding the highest standards of patient care, we're protecting our patients from harm, and really safeguarding the data that they're entrusting to us for their care. A medical device strategy and IoT strategy can also help you strengthen your business operations. So it's not only all about security, it's also about identifying operational weaknesses and opportunities for more efficient clinical workflows. Establishing a formal and repeatable program is also not really an easy feat by any means, but there are some key strategic areas that can really help you get started in building an effective strategy and program. So this is what we affectionately like to call our Stargate, but there's 8 key foundational areas to really consider when you're building a strategy. Number 1 is governance and communication, and this is really building our communication channels, ownership, oversight of the program, and executive buy-in. Second is asset management and discovery, finding out what we have, where it is, how it's currently configured. That ties back to a lot of what Jonathan spoke about around, you know, a lot of our clients having difficulties in finding devices either physically or on the network. 3, virus and malware protection, you know, abilities for our current security tool sets to really apply to Internet of Things devices and medical devices where feasible. Patching, that's always an extremely hard struggle for our clients as well, and that's really developing an operationally repeatable process to patch and upgrade devices. 5th, technical security and access controls. How do we limit who and what can really interact with these devices? And that's really a means of locking down the physical and logical access to these systems, as well as doing device hardening where devices support that. Third-party validation. This is really our targeted due diligence of our vendors, our devices, IoT products, medical devices, and really honing in on refining our intake assessments and procurement processes. 7th is training, so ensuring that anyone who is involved in the interaction and use of these devices, both from kind of a clinical care perspective and securing them, is aware of their responsibilities when it comes to security, as well as the uniqueness of these devices that are different from, you know, traditional endpoints, servers, networking equipment, that kind of stuff. Network protection and isolation is really the final strategic area here. And this is where we can leverage a lot of our technologies to provide compensating level network controls, both to the devices themselves and the care networks they operate on, and do as much as we can to mitigate some of the other areas we weren't able to resolve. All right, so strategic objectives. These are really kind of the core and the heart of any long-term effective strategy. So a cornerstone medical device and IoT objective is really to ensure that we're still providing the highest quality care when it comes to protecting our patients' most sensitive data. You know, this is data that is ultimately the most important to our patients and highly private and confidential. So we want to not only give them good, high quality care, but be good stewards of their data. We want our program to be operationally achievable with continued risk reduction, you know, not focusing just on building a sustainable program, but really executing targeted projects to build momentum as we're getting started, and as well as address a lot of our largest risks. We want to clearly define and educate those who will be key in enacting this strategy, and especially giving the ability to provide ample opportunity for stakeholders and executive feedback and input as the strategy grows. And the feedback part is really crucial. You want to make sure that everyone is getting their voice heard and they have opportunity to really contribute and give feedback while you're building this. You want to develop a clearly defined and consistent, repeatable process that aligns with and integrates into your existing workflows and operations whenever possible. So successful programs are really built and supported by conscious investing into the program. You want to make sure that you're setting aside capital for investments along the way. You know, this isn't just kind of a one-year deal. It's something that's going to become commonplace and you're going to always retain in your organization. So you want to make sure you're retaining money and setting aside money for investments, both in people and technology. A medical device and IoT program is not a point in time. It's something that you really have to continuously nurture and invest in order for it to grow and be successful. And as you develop your strategy, you might find that you lack certain skill sets or even lack experience in certain areas. And so the best advice there is to really consult experts in this field that can help you into growing your program, training your staff, and then also helping you align with industry guidance and solutions that have proven to be effective at other organizations. Technology and automation can also augment our strategies, and this really allows us to reduce the volume of otherwise manual and difficult work into something that's much more streamlined, clean, and efficient. And it really gives your team access to data and opportunities that you previously would not have had. And so as your program matures, you need to have the ability to scale your strategy as well as make measures against yourself, your progress, and see how we're tracking against our objectives and our vision. And really tracking metrics and setting key performance indicators in every year that you're growing your strategy is extremely important. And so to cover how some of the automation and how Ordr's technology can help, I will turn things over to Russell.
Hey, thanks a lot. So what I'd like to do is dovetail into what was just being discussed and Nick walked through in the automation side and talk to you about some of the key things that are actually possible now to automate in your medical device practice. And honestly, a lot of what we're going to talk about are things that weren't really technologically possible about 4 or 5 years ago. So this is really representative of an area where advancements have happened by organizations who focused in this, and now there's new capabilities that have been brought to market that are really important for you to be versed in. You know, if we step back, I would offer that there's 4 major areas that you really want to be able to address when you think about dealing with a scalable approach to medical device protection. You know, number one is being able to have comprehensive and complete information about all of the assets you've got, medical devices, IoT devices, IT managed devices that can ever connect to your managed environment. And you want that knowledge to be persistent and consistent. You want it to be rich enough so that the knowledge is available to all the different teams that care about it, whether it's the security guys, whether it's the health service team, or whether it's the IT team. You'd like to have consistency in the information in terms of what those devices actually are so that all the different groups are synchronized and the tools that they use have that knowledge. And so we're kind of getting into very detailed information. The second thing that you'd like to have is be able to understand what systems are doing what. You know, if I've got a CT scanner, if I've got an infusion pump, if I've got a video surveillance camera, what are these devices actually doing over the wire? Because at the end of the day, a lot of cybersecurity attacks are over the wire. You know, they attack systems. And so you want to understand what your devices are doing. Are they reaching out to bad actors? Are they reaching out to unknown actors? Are they potentially misconfigured? Are they under active attack? And that also requires not only monitoring what they're doing, but also understanding if they may be doing anomalous communications in ways that don't make sense. The third area that becomes important is, are the systems vulnerable? And do you understand what those vulnerabilities are? And can you spend not much time figuring that out and basically do risk assessment on a continuous basis? And the last area that really is the holy grail is, how do you protect them? At the end of the day, as was mentioned, medical devices are a bit special in terms of what you're able to actually do from an organization in terms of putting patches on them, putting software agents on them, and you've got to keep them available regardless. So how do you turn around and do this in an effective way? And if you can do all of these four things in a scalable way, which is largely automated, I think everybody will be better served. And so let's deconstruct each one of these to find out kind of where they've been hard and kind of what you can do now and what's different. So looking at the first question, if an objective you've got is to be able to really identify and classify all of your devices, I want to know all of my C-arms, I want to know all of my IV pumps, I want to know all of my patient monitors, and I want that to be accurate in real time. I want to also understand my facilities equipment, my elevators, my sensors and refrigerators. Technologically, that problem can actually be solved these days, largely because you can put technology in your existing environment that can watch communication patterns over the wire and use the information that it learns to get deep in understanding what those assets actually are. This, from a networking side, this actually gets into decoding specific protocols that assets are using. It gets into synchronizing your knowledge with potentially other tools of record that are responsible for managing those systems, whether this is integrating in things like Cerner, whether this is integrating things like Alaris servers. And so you can kind of orchestrate and collect a lot of the information in real time about all the devices that are currently connected. And then you can synchronize that information with other sources. This is a huge advancement. I would kind of offer that every time Ordr has been involved with any type of activity, ground zero in any evaluation for the technology, as well as ground zero for any rollout project, is to solve this problem of identification of all the devices. And the classification is equally important. You want to put like with like. You'd like to know a complete set of what are all of my BD pumps, not just each one individually. And let me give you a feeling for what type I mean by gathering information about devices. Here's a screen that's, we in our tool have, that actually gives you a feel for the level of depth you're getting about devices that's obtained passively. There's no human involved with collecting this information. As you can see from both the left hand and the right hand, we're getting deep in terms of model numbers and manufacturers, serial numbers, operating system version information, as well as all of the details about where the devices are actually plugged into the network. And are they actively connected now? And are they coming in wired or wireless? Have they moved around? When did we last see them? So all of this information now can be passively obtained without you doing any work. And this is very different than the days when you'd have to walk around with a spreadsheet and manually go figure out what these devices actually were and where they're located. So it completely changes the game. The next piece, that if you start solving that device identification and classification side, it actually allows you to start moving up to another business area that's really important to start automating, and that's improving and streamlining some of your onboarding processes. One of the things I'll call out is, we as a vendor have paired with several different organizations who offer CMMS tools. So I'm showing an example here of what's possible with Ordr and the Duvolo system for anybody who's using it or considering it. But this is possible with other systems as well. And kind of one model is here, if a device connects into the network, our system will understand that it's connected, and we can immediately find out if that device is already registered in Nuvolo. So, from procurement, it's actually been managed, and the preventative maintenance is being tracked in that system. And if that's the case, we can just verify that all of that information that's stored in your CMMS is accurate. And I know several organizations who spend a lot of time trying to make sure they've got the right MAC addresses and the devices where they expect, and do they have the IP address assignment right? And technicians are trained in terms of understanding how to plug in the right data there, but it's very manual. This type of approach allows you to make sure that that's always accurate, updated, and no human needs to be involved anymore, which is a huge step forward. It's a big resource save. But the other thing that you can start dealing with is identifying assets that haven't gone through your normal procurement or onboarding channels that you would have expected. And you can flag and understand where those happen and force that becomes triggered, where you can now make sure that procurement, compliance, and approval processes actually occur for devices that connect in that are not in your CMMS tooling. And so this type of approach really can change the game for the guarantee that you're synchronized in terms of all the assets you've got, and that there's a consistent way and tracking of them, and therefore all of your management around those assets is done. And most organizations of any scale run into the fact that they get devices plugging in because a doctor wants to buy it, or a clinician is involved with deploying that thing. They just have skipped part of the process that you normally would get into. The second piece that I'll call out is focuses on what are the devices actually doing. And as you see from the spaghetti side picture on the left-hand side here, what we're trying to show you is that different devices have very vastly different communication patterns. When I sit on my computer and my workstation and get my job done, I generally talk to specific resources inside and going out to the internet for things. But when you start talking about medical and other IoT devices, most people have not spent the time to understand what they naturally would go talk to and what they wouldn't. And so being able to get that visibility that on a device by device basis, you know who it's talking to, and you have an ability to understand if it's good or bad, that's really what you want to get into the bowels of. And you can do this too. Technology is advanced now where you can passively watch all the communication flows to your device. You can understand whether those are normal or abnormal based on AI. And by the way, at the scale we're dealing with, where, as was mentioned earlier, we can run into organizations who have over 1,000 different unique types of devices in their environment. In some cases, we've seen over 10,000 different unique IoT devices alone. Those numbers are just vast. So you need technology assist to automate the understanding of not only what they are, but what are they doing in your environment, and is that right or wrong? Or are they under attack, or have they been misconfigured? That's what you're trying to get into. And technology like Ordr that's built on ML and allows you to baseline automatically without a human having to figure out, dramatically changes the game here for being able to find out what these devices are actually doing. And here's an example of what that looks like. What I'm showing you now is what we call the flow genome. We're on the visualization. I've got different views, for example, on the bottom where you're seeing the device on the left-hand side of the view, and all the lines radiating it to the right-hand side are showing you who it's talking to. And so that summarization all maps to devices we've learned, and so we can have you drill in. On the top area, on the top left, we're actually normalizing and tell you whether we think these are normal or abnormal communication patterns. And that little helix view is showing you that. It turns out everything that's blue there is normal, but if we see yellows or reds, we know we're seeing some abnormal conversation to or from this asset, which is a security indication of something that's awry. And when you get pretty deep down into what specific application was involved, how much data was transmitted, sent, and received, so being able to understand, hey, which systems are reaching out to the internet, which ones are doing large volumes of data, potentially passing patient information, that's the type of stuff you can start gleaning. And all of that information now can be collected for you so that you can do queries, and the intelligence of automating what's abnormal or not becomes a relief because you can benefit from tools doing that for you. If I move into the third area of consideration, this really revolves around the notion of how do I understand and kind of get more regular in being able to automate risk assessment. I know that when I first started getting involved in healthcare, risk assessment really was something that you had to rely on experts coming in and doing, and that's very important. But a lot of the work that got on there was manual effort in terms of walking through the inventory you've got, figuring out which ones are connected, figuring out versions of software that are there, reconciling that information with what known manufacturer issues from a security side released. Were there any FDA recall databases? Can I associate an MDS2 form and kind of this device's relation to what it deals with from an EPI standpoint? You now have technology able to step in and help automate that part of the problem. So being able to leverage a tool that can not only figure out the devices, but can gather all the sources of potential vulnerability that we know about your assets specifically from the FDA, from the ICS CERT databases. Even going more deeply, being able to monitor that device and find out if you see obvious configuration issues where it's doing abnormal things. Being able to potentially tie in scanning if that makes sense to your organization for active scanning and aggregate that knowledge with the devices. All of these things allow you eventually to risk score assets on a more real-time and continuous basis. And it basically takes the manual labor out of the steps that's the data aggregation and collection side, and now lets your risk assessment move into where folks like Meditology can really assist you in how do I assess the risk and what do I do about it, and how do I improve myself programmatically around this. And that's really the big objective. So you're operating with that knowledge in hand. So Ordr brings this to the table. And here's a typical example of the type of things that we tend to see. In this case, I'm focusing on vulnerabilities because an organization is running a lot of systems that have embedded operating OSs that are known to be vulnerable or outdated or no longer supported. And so, this is actually a real world example of data that we've received in a small proof of concept environment where the number of IoT and medical devices that we found that were running old versions of Windows was prevalent. And I will offer that we have not yet been in an environment, after going through hundreds and hundreds of deployments, we have not ever come up with a clear bill of materials in terms of running old OSs. And pretty much every organization we've engaged with have been surprised to find out what specific systems they've got deployed that they didn't realize were running old versions of Windows 7. And to be able to automatically get this information in your hands right away is just huge. And that's the type of thing that is now possible, which really changes the game for you. And now you can start setting up programs for how do you want to relate this information to any migration plans that you have for equipment, and potentially have the cyber side come into those decisions for retirement of gear and replacements and the like, as well as helping figure out which systems you have no plans to do so and what security safeguards you need to put around that equipment to keep it operational, which is another big thing. One organization we're working with actually has a number of old Windows systems that are really important to them. They have no plans to replace, so they want to implement compensating controls and actually protect those assets in the network at scale. And so that's kind of one of their big outcomes of their objectives where they're going down the path. And I think that's no different than any of you guys will be sitting on the fence and trying to figure out what to go do. The other area that I'll call out as part of being able to get risk information is really understand if a device is potentially under attack or has been compromised. So it's one thing to aggregate information about which devices are known to be vulnerable, but real world intelligence of which systems are actually in your environment at observed threat is also a big deal. And in that area, there's a lot of different technologies that organizations in IT and InfoSec has traditionally had, but a lot of that has not been facing medical equipment, because the medical equipment is usually something that is deployed in separate parts of a networked environment, or some of the classic tools like vulnerability scanning is not something one is comfortable using on them, or there's no agents on those things to let you know if something's going on. So technology like Ordr can turn around and provide you deep insight into whether those devices are actually under attack or compromised. The fact that we can look at a device, see all its communications, and automatically know whether it's reaching out to bad places on the internet, to unexpected places on the internet, or even if it's reaching out to a workstation who got plugged in right next to it that got taken over by, Ripple, or in the case of Ripple, it would actually be a different IoT device. You'll get that type of information at your fingertips now, and that's huge, because now you're understanding at the ground level what's actually going on where I am. One of the interesting things is IoT devices and medical devices, whether good or bad, tend to be a bit of a canary in the coal mine, in that for any type of cyber activity that's happening in your environment, they tend to be very chatty. And so it's very easy to see normal versus abnormal if you have anomalous behavior detection in a technology you've deployed, because it allows you to spot those right away and then turn around and now say, what am I going to go do about it if I have an infestation? I've observed a workstation is now causing a problem, or that security camera that happens to be running an embedded version of an operating system that's been taken over now. You're starting to see those things radiating out, and that's huge. And that leads to the next step of the equation, which is really about how do you protect devices. And I think this is where every organization who we at Ordr work with is really trying to get to. This is the goal. Being able to implement protection measures on your devices so you can protect your clinical assets, especially the ones that are important, have patient data, deliver critical care, and you have an ability to do that effectively is key. And being able to not only do that with your clinical devices, but any other type of system that is also in your healthcare organization, whether it's physical security, whether it's payment systems, whether it's sensors, all of these things become really important to you to understand what's going on, but the protection side is the big piece. And the complication traditionally with protecting these devices is you don't have control of the device itself nor the software on it, and you need to keep it operational. And given those two paradigms, it means you can't deploy their traditional security safeguards of putting antivirus or other security agents on those systems. It also means that you need to keep systems online even if you're concerned about them, because you're still delivering care, they're providing a service. You don't take cameras out, you don't take the elevator out, you don't take the IV pump out. So what else do you do? The best answer around this is something called microsegmentation. This goes by a lot of different names, whether I use the term microsegmentation or zero trust protection or more classic segmentation, or I often say device-centric segmentation. What you're really trying to do is put constraints around where this device can communicate and who's allowed to communicate with it. So you make sure it can get its job done, but you don't let anything else occur. So it's basically eliminating that device from unnecessary conversations. And it's a distancing formula, to be at the end of the day honest, for your devices. And that's really what you're trying to do. That technique is what organizations have actually been doing in the data center. VMware with NSX provides this ability to protect your workloads and servers running in your data centers or in the cloud. Illumio goes down the same path. What you can do now is take that same approach for your medical and IoT kit and protect them at the point of access. And there's many different ways you can think about where you actually want to implement your protection methods. At the coarsest notion is I'd like to protect them at the firewall layer, but then you can start bringing it inside, where I'd like to build out special medical enclaves or physical security enclaves. And you want to protect it in more of a zone-based approach. Or you may just want to protect the device from any type of unknown communications, and that's just right zero trust at the place where it plugs in. So it's almost like you've got a guard where that device connected. And all of those make a bit of sense, but a way to really try to describe this with an analogy, which is what I'm going to try to do in the next 2 slides, is really saying consider a zoo. In a zoo, in this picture, a zoo has a lot of different types of animals that are in the zoo. You've got herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, you've got lions and tigers and bears right next to my antelopes and penguins. And so when you think of a zoo, you don't have everything in the zoo in one big area, right? This is not the way you approach a zoo, because you would have mayhem. And so instead, what you do in a zoo is you break things down, and you actually have different approaches to how you segregate different sets of animals. In some cases, you have lots of animals that can logically and kind of naturally belong together. So an herbivores is an example of that. You can put your zebras with your antelope in the same area, and they can cohabitate just nicely. And so you do so. Whereas you will make sure that your lions are isolated. You will make sure that any, very endangered species like pandas or polar bears have their own areas where they're treated for, monitored, and protected, and not allowed to intermingle with other systems that don't need to interact with them. And that's really the notion that we're dealing with here. So what I'm really trying to introduce a notion, sometimes you have this concept of top-down segmentation, where I have big playpens that I'm putting heterogeneous stuff in. And sometimes I need to do bottoms-up segmentation control, which means there's a specific set of animals that I want to protect on its own, like my polar bears, and I will never intermingle them. I'm building in special protections just for those guys. Both the approaches, top-down, let things intermingle for a certain set of stuff, and bottoms-up, let's protect a specific set of animals, both have meaning and both are done. That same concept is what you want to be doing in your environment as well. And so being able to implement top-down zone-based segmentation for medical equipment, physical security, facilities equipment makes great sense. But now I want to do bottoms-up protection for very specific things that are important to me. And this is often when you've got equipment that is highly critical to your operations, very critical from a patient risk perspective, or known to be highly vulnerable, but you have to keep it going. In that case, you want to selectively implement the bottoms-up protection to complement your zone-based approach. And that zone-based protection is really what's suitable for really critical IoT and OT devices. It's not something you tend to do for workstations or servers. Those tend to be more zone-based protection. And so finding out what goes in a zone, what goes into a microsegment, making sure you can implement policies on both sides is really the heart of the problem of what it means to deal with an effective segmentation strategy. Ordr by design does this stuff very well. The root of our company was to protect IoT and medical equipment. And so we built mechanisms now in our tooling to automate the process of allowing you to implement protections top down or bottoms up that are policy driven or functionally driven, and to do all the steps before it. Find the devices, find the risk, figure out what's normal or not, build the policies for what it means to protect these devices, and then force them to be implemented in your environment using your current infrastructure of your networked infrastructure, your NAC tooling, your firewall tooling. It all integrates with those to make that possible. And that's really what you can end up doing, which is very different. And so if I pull back, really what I try to walk through with you is the ability to change the game through automation and really hit hard the ability to allow organizations to start from the beginning of get a good handle of all the devices that you've got at a very deep level of specifically what they are, what they've been doing, how do you group like with like, and then to understand and start doing behavioral analysis for figuring out where they're going, what they're doing, what's normal, what's not. Then build on top of that a risk score modeling that can help influence and have you understand where you need to spend some special attention. And lastly, take the models for where you want to get to, start segmenting and protecting your equipment in ways that are feasible for you and specific to you. And to help you with this process, we provide technology. Meditology helps provide services to make you go down this path and build your program so you can be effective here too. And again, this type of thing was not available for you about 4 years ago, and now this is finally possible. And that's where we were early on showing a lot of the organization who had been working with us. This is exactly the journey they're all going down. So without further ado, what we're hoping to do is open this up to questions now. And so I was going to flip over and do any questions, but Nick, Jonathan, while I bring up the questions, is there anything you wanted to call out before we jump in? And I might have
No, I think all good, Russell. We can start questions if we have.
One thing I'll say is that we've definitely seen clients with Ordr in the environment, and what Russell was talking about, the outdated operating systems. It's such a great tool to provide that visibility, and then that allows us to then really get specific with the risk assessment and go, look, here's the issues, and provide some really good recommendations on how they can go about starting to address those issues. So it's been very helpful for us in terms of us knowing the environment, because typically we're looking at evidence, and we obviously can't think of every single question or look at every single piece of physical evidence. So by an organization having a tool like Ordr in their environment, the visibility alone just it opens the doors to start addressing the issues. Otherwise, you don't know what you don't know. So it's been great in that regard for us.
Well, let me jump in. I've got a couple of questions here, and feel free, folks, to add any more that you've got to the list. We've got about 10 minutes that we can answer anything that's on your minds right now. The first one, I think, Nick, Jonathan, is probably going to your way. How critical is our clinical engineering and IoT asset inventory to security?
I mean, I think if you don't know what's in your environment, how do you even begin securing it? So I think it is the most important foundational piece is having the inventory in place. And even companies that do it manually and do it really well typically still have some deficiencies in that maybe it's not getting updated. There's still that factor of human error. So again, we've seen where we were chasing down a device to throw some patches on it, and for 3 weeks, nobody could tell us where it was at in the hospital until we figured out that it had been decommissioned and the inventory hadn't been updated. So foundationally, it's probably one of the most important pieces, is to have a current and up-to-date inventory. Nick, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, to build off what you said too, Jonathan, is that we've also seen a lot of clients that were eager to go down the path of building a program, but they skipped the step of really either getting in a tool to assist or shoring up their current processes around their devices and their inventory, only to have to kind of put the strategy on the back burner later on and have to go back and rectify that. So the sooner that you can address that, and the sooner that you can get in technologies like Ordr to help you do that, the better.
Here's another one for you guys, and I'll probably chime in at the end from what we've seen as well. But what team or teams do you find are actually responsible for medical device security and in general overall IoT security? But let's focus on the medical one first within healthcare organizations, because it's clearly a kind of a multi-tent issue. And kind of what teams and how do they work together towards a common good? Kind of what's best practices there?
Right. So that goes back to one of the common challenges, is that typically you're talking about biomed. There could be a radiology team that's separate from even biomed, and then you have your IT and information security teams, and they're all kind of working independently of each other. IT may come and connect a device to the network, but then after that, they won't touch the device. So opening up those lines of communication so that biomedical, radiology, and IT and information security can all talk to each other is very important. And so we typically suggest that, as again, part of the foundational process, is that one of the first things you do when starting a program focused on medical devices is to set up a governance committee and sit everyone down, those major stakeholders, include clinicians, and sit down in a room, quarterly, whatever cadence you decide on, more is better, but so that you can talk about the issues together and you kind of break down those silos that we typically see. Nick, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on.
Yeah, sure. So in relation to that as well, getting that governance structure and getting roles and responsibility sets for the teams is really critical. It's pretty it's pretty streamlined to get quick wins and to get progress. But where organizations we see run into struggles a lot is, let's say we do want to put money into getting a tool, or we need to replace devices or something like that. Often the challenge comes in, well, who's going to pay for it? We may have designed who's responsible for the security part, but whose budget will it come out of? And so that's really crucial to keep in mind as well.
This approach.
Russell, did we lose you?
No, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yep, I got you. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, gang. What I was going to say is one of the things we find out, each of the different departments tends to have a different set of careabouts of the information they want to collect about their inventory. You know, by way of example, we tend to see, you know, the health services organizations and the clinical and biomed teams, they want to get down into the specifics of all the medical equipment. They want to get down and get information about make, model, and manufacturer. They want to get utilization information about what that equipment's doing. They'd like to get their hands on all of the information from the MDS2 forms and kind of what's been published about those assets from a risk and patient delivery perspective. That's the type of stuff they're looking for. And they also often want to get utilization data that, you know, tell me what these devices are doing, how often they're delivering patient care, so that they can start planning if they can right size their inventories. That's a very different discussion than when you talk to a security team who seems to be much more focused on, can I get awareness of configuration and security issues around the devices? Which devices are vulnerable to Ripple? Which devices are vulnerable to WannaCry or Origin 11? You know, how many of these types of devices are where located in my environment? They don't get quite as deep on the medical device specifics, but they want a more of a robust security set of information about the assets. And then if you talk to the IT guys, it's even a different set of questions that you tend to run into and what they're looking for, like what's normal and abnormal communications, what I need to open up in the network to make sure this is talking to the right sets of systems, and I start blocking what it doesn't need to do. And that's where having that group get together, as you guys were saying, in a governance forum becomes so important, because you round out what becomes important from an overall systems perspective. Let's see, I'm going to move on to another question. I think we just had, hold on a quick sec. Yeah, what I was going to offer is there's, this one may be for me, apologize if it is. Let's see. Does Ordr provide correlation between node CVEs to determine vulnerabilities associated with an individual device? Yeah, thanks for that question. The answer is yeah. Ordr actually does. We have an ability to associate published CVEs as well as published FDA recall information, and we tie that down to the specific inventory you've got. So if you were sitting in front of our dashboard, you'd actually be able to first, you know, look at a CVE and say, what are all the devices that have this attached to it? And on the flip side, when you look at any given device, you can also see all the CVEs associated with it. We've also more recently released an ability to digitize MDS2 form information, which is less about kind of published vulnerabilities, but it's more about the composition of the device and kind of and you know what it has in relation to patient information and the like. And that's also now available on all the equipment too and all the devices. So I think we're getting close to the top of the hour. So, you know, one last question that I've got here is, you know, does Ordr and the tooling we're talking about, how does that fit in relation to NAC tools like Cisco ICE or Aruba ClearPass? You know, Nick, Jonathan, I don't know if you've got an answer for that, but I'm happy to jump in if you want, if you don't.
Go right ahead, Russell.
Okay. You know, I'll offer, we have a lot of organizations we interact with that are going down a NAC path. One of the things that they've observed as they've been doing so is the level of device specificity that it's got is it's not really detailed. It doesn't provide the level of insight of specific model numbers and serial numbers and classifying medical and other facilities equipment down to a granular level. It does it because some of the more advanced techniques that are available, NAC technology is not designed. So the benefit is it's complementary. When you tie in tools like Ordr into a NAC tool, you start enriching your investment in NAC. So now your NAC becomes smart because it knows the inventory and has all the groups. So you can now set up the rules for your pumps. You can set up the rules for your you know, patient monitors. and make sure that those are very specific and accurate to that set of equipment. And that's something that has been an objective with NAC tools, but has not been possible. I think you find that Ordr tends to complement NAC tools, and every organization we've been involved with that's been going down NAC likes the combination of those things. It makes their job better. So, I think with that said, I was going to call out, I think, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this session. Nick, Jonathan, any closing words of wisdom you want before we let people go?
Thanks, Russell. I think the important thing is to realize that medical device security is important, and then to start to address it and ask yourself the questions that we've kind of posed today. What are our challenges? Sit in a room and whiteboard, brainstorm, go, okay, what have we noticed in our environment? Are devices not going through procurement? Are they just hooking up to the wireless? What are the issues? So you start by knowing. Now you've taken away the issue of not knowing. Now you do know, you've addressed it, and then begin to formulate that strategy. And that's certainly something that we have experience with doing. We've built multi-year strategies, and we're very experienced in this. And just to echo your sentiment, Russell, thank you everyone for joining. I certainly appreciate it. Nick?
Yeah, to echo kind of Jonathan's sentiments too, is, whenever you start to build your programs, don't feel like you have to kind of be the master of everything right away. It takes a long time to learn this stuff, and organizations like Meditology and Ordr are here to help you guys on your journey. So don't always try and struggle through stuff, but reach out and get that help whenever you need it. And really appreciate everybody being on the line and participating today.
Okay, gang. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Nick, for joining me at this discussion, and I hope everybody found it very illuminating.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Russell.